Wisconsin. The most important things to know about me are that I am a wife and mother first, and then I do ministry. But my ministry first is to my family, and that's important for you to know because I share many, many stories about my family when I give talks and presentations, sometimes when they're even there, which gets a little bit awkward for them sometimes. But they're not here tonight, so you get to hear all the dirty secrets of my kids and my husband. I'm just teasing. No, I don't have that. So I want to share tonight a little bit about this topic, a church in need of Easter. But I want us to share, and I want us to talk and have conversation. Even you'll have some time to talk with one another in the Q&A. I want us to really focus on not what's wrong. We'll talk a little bit about what's wrong. We'll talk a little bit about the statistics and the unfortunate things that are going on and the struggles that we're having. But I want us to focus on the fact that the most important thing about each one of us is our baptism. Raise your hand if you've been baptized. If you don't, I'm sure there's a deacon or priest here somewhere. If you're not raising your hand, we get that taken care of. Right? If you've been baptized, I've been baptized. And so we can talk about the laity, but I prefer the term baptized to laity. Because our baptism is what equips us for everything. Absolutely everything. And it's what gives me hope. It's what gives me power of the Holy Spirit, not my own power, but His power, to be able to speak not just around, but into the problems of our church today. And I think this is a perfect time to be doing this presentation, even though it's called a Church in Need of Easter, and we're about to start Christmas, so that's a little awkward, but I think it's a perfect time because the things we're going to talk about tonight are things you can do with your family on Thursday. And I know some of you just went, oh, she doesn't know my family. We don't talk about religion because we can't, because people get all worked up. But I'm going to tell you, I'm not saying that you should talk about religion. I'm not saying that you should start in on the abuse scandal at conversation at dinner. I'm not saying any of those things. What I'm saying is that you can tap into your baptism on Thursday, or Wednesday, or Friday, or whenever it is you gather with family, to begin to have conversations with one another about why your faith matters to you. Why does your faith matter to you? When we talk about a church in need of Easter, we're talking about a fact that the church is dying. And I don't think it is overstating to say, come on, we can do it, or not. I don't think it's overstating to say, oh, I went through all of it, didn't I? Son of a gun. You gotta love technology. All right. I don't think it's overstating to say that our church is dying. Because here are some of the statistics. There are 1.2 million people that live in the Green Bay Diocese. 326,000 of them are registered Catholics. And they did a study in our diocese in 2015. Look at those numbers. Over the last 10 years, infant baptisms have dropped in our diocese 30%. Nationally, they've dropped 25%. 31% First Communions have dropped in 10 years. Nationally, 10%. Catechesis and RE, so elementary school students that go to Catholic school or religious ed, in any way, shape, or form, has dropped by almost half in our diocese and 23% nationally. High school students, over half. Only 19% nationally. Confirmations have dropped 26% here in our diocese, and marriages is the only one where we are not far and above the national average, where we're not worse than the national average. And still, we've dropped 40% in the last 10 years in marriages in the Catholic Church. I don't think it's overstating to say that we're dying. At least not by these numbers. They're depressing. They're sad. Bishop Ricken got these numbers when they first happened and cried. And then prayed. And then launched new evangelization and discipleship. Because he said, we can't sit around and do nothing anymore. We can't sit around and do business as usual. Because business as usual in the Catholic Church isn't working. People are walking away. For every one person who comes into the church in RCIA, 6 people are walking away. So think about your parish and the people who came in at RCIA last year. 6 people walked away for every one of those that came into the church. That's not sustainable. The only reason we have any growth whatsoever in the church on a national level, does anyone know why? Immigrants. The church in the South and the Southwest looks like it's growing, but when they start diving into their numbers, they're starting to see the same things. And the only reasons their numbers look like they're growing is because they're getting an influx of immigrants. And those immigrants are coming from Central and South America, where cultural Catholicism is very strong. So that's where they're going. Roger Enrico, who is the CEO of PepsiCo, for those who was, not currently, had a quote that I think hits the nail on the head for what we need in our church right now. Here's what he said. He said, "Small changes to small things are a waste of time. Small changes to big things are dangerous because they give you the illusion of progress." Big changes to big things. That's what changes our trajectory. We spend a lot of time in our own faith lives, in our own parishes. If you volunteer at your parish, if you're a staff member at a parish, I was for 15 years. And I love the work that I did, but I will tell you, we spend a lot of time making small changes to small things. Or sometimes small changes to big things. Like when in one of the parishes I worked for, we switched from long-handled collection baskets to passed collection baskets. And you would have thought we started sacrificing live chickens on the altar. And it was so exhausting of a change for us to make that when we got done, we went, oh, finally, look at what we did. It's done. Small change to a big thing. Or the worst ever was the parish staff meeting. I spent 45 minutes crafting an easel checkout policy. You know the easels that sit at the entrance of your church with the poster board on them for the events that are coming up? They were going missing in our parish. And people were upset because they didn't want the easel and it was gone. It didn't get put away in the closet. And so 45 minutes of a parish staff meeting we spent crafting the easel checkout policy. Who could get the easels? How are they going to get checked out? And who was responsible for following up to make sure the easels got put away correctly? Pope Francis says that we can be at times, self-referential church. We do things and talk about things and spend a lot of time and energy on things that only matter to us. They don't matter to anyone else outside of that core inner circle. The easel checkout policy didn't matter to anyone except the parish staff. Nobody else cared, but we spent 45 minutes on it one day. And so when we talk about the fact that we cannot continue to do business as usual, that's actually a direct quote from the Lineamenta document from the South American bishops got together and had a synod on the new evangelization in 2002. And one of the key quotes that came out of that document was, the Catholic Church can no longer continue to do business as usual. A business as usual approach, they said, isn't working. Why? Why isn't it working? What's the problem? What are we running into? So I want to talk just a moment about 2 key problems that we have now, because I think if we can identify 2 of the problems, not all of them, I don't want to be overly simplistic. There are lots of nuances and elements and depth that we could go into, but if we can identify at least 2 of the problems, I think we can start to address how to fix them. The first problem that I see is this. We have a lot of very good, holy, faithful Catholics who have a relationship with an institution, not with a person. We have a lot of good, holy, faithful Catholics who will talk about how much they love their faith They will talk about how much they love the church. They might talk about how much they love their parish. But if you ask them about their love for Jesus, they can't speak to that. That doesn't have really meaning for them. That's not their fault. This is a huge part of how they were raised, to understand that the church stands in for Jesus. My friends, that is not Catholic teaching. We have a relationship with Jesus, and the church exists secondarily to draw us deeper into relationship with Him, not the reverse. So we have to ask some hard questions, even about our own faith. Do I have a relationship with Jesus? Or do I have a relationship with a structure, an institution, a building, even in some cases? This isn't going to work anymore. This attitude of relationship with faith, relationship with a church, relationship with an institution first, is not going to work in today's society. People today don't want a relationship with the Catholic Church. Can you blame them? Can you blame them? Right now, with what we see, the institution has failed in some really key ways. And so if our focus is on making people better Catholics first, instead of on making people have a deeper relationship and walking them into deeper relationship with our Lord first, we're going to miss the boat. We are speaking right past them, and they don't want to hear anything we have to say when we start with the church. And so we have to do some real soul searching on our own parts to say, what does that look like? I want to give you a really practical example. This is an example of my grandmother. My grandmother is currently, my mom said yesterday, she's 95 or 96. So she's 95 or 96. A couple of years ago, my grandmother came to visit. She lives in Indiana for Thanksgiving. And we were having some conversations about this ministry that we had founded, which I started with my parents. We're sitting around after dinner talking, and she's asking me about what we do, and I start to get animated, and I think I threw something accidentally because I flail when I get animated. And she said, listen, why do you do all this stuff? Now I want you to know my grandmother is a faithful Catholic woman. She goes to daily Mass. She goes to confession once a week, which I said, Grandma, why? You sleep like all day. What could you possibly be doing that needs confession once a week? I'm confused. Right? And she prays the rosary multiple times a day. And my grandmother looked at me and said, why do you do this stuff that you do? And I said, Grandma, because it gives me so much joy. It brings me so much life to do this work. Why do you do the things that you do? Because I thought this would be a common point for us. Why do you go to Mass and confession and pray the rosary? And why is that so important to you? And she looked at me and she said, oh, I don't get any joy from that. I do it because I'm supposed to. And at that point, I was hyper aware of the fact that my grandmother may have a relationship with an institution. Because when I asked her about a relationship with Jesus, not using that language because she's in her 90s, I know that's not language she would be comfortable with. I just said, what does it look like, Grandma, for you to talk to Jesus? What does it look like in your prayer when you connect with Him? You know what she said? I don't do that. That wouldn't be appropriate because He is God and I am not. So my grandma has a relationship, or did have a relationship with an institution first, a structure first, which means this scandal has rocked her to a different level than it has me. Now, the people who belong to my grandmother's parish in central Indiana, if you had talked to them, if you sat down, if I went down and did a parish retreat for their staff, said, I want you to identify the people in your parish who you would say are already disciples. These are already people who have a lived relationship with Jesus. They love the Lord. I think my grandma would make that list. from that parish staff. You know why? Because we are used to looking at the externals and not taking the time to have that conversation, to find out what's really going on. I made that assumption. I absolutely made that assumption about my grandma until 3 years ago Thanksgiving when we had this conversation. So our first problem, I think, is a problem of relationship with an institution rather than a person. And I think, and I don't think it's going too far to say, I think that's a problem some of our bishops have. Because this cover-up, this scandal, is about people who tried to protect an institution above a lived relationship with Jesus. You can't look at anyone and say, well, obviously they have a relationship with Jesus if you don't have that conversation with them first. If you don't find out where they really are. So that's the first problem that I think we have, and I think that the antidote to that is partially our own awareness, our own self-awareness, that when we talk about our faith, do we talk about faith in the church, or do we talk about Jesus? Because look, I could get up here and talk to you about my husband. My husband is a wonderful man. He's a great guy. He's a wonderful father. And I can tell you all kinds of stories about my husband, and if I never use his name when I'm talking about him, doesn't that indicate to you a little something about our relationship? If I only ever refers to him as husband or Mr. Bird, that tells you a little something about my relationship with him. So we need to get more comfortable talking about Jesus, using his name, sharing what he's done in our lives, being people who go to church because it helps us with our relationship with Jesus. That's the first problem. The second problem that I see is this, and this one isn't mine. If any of you know Sister Marie Colby, she's a brilliant theologian who teaches at Silver Lake College in Manitowoc. And she has identified what I think is the second key problem in our culture and in the way we try to talk about faith today that's led to these numbers. And it's this. We are in the change of an age right now. Not just an age of change, but the change of an age. We are moving into a time in history where people's whole context for life is shifting. We are moving from a time and place where laws and definitions define who we are and how we live, to a place and time where, where life experience informs my definitions and my laws. All right, I want to give you a really concrete example of this. When I was a baby, and I got an ear infection and got sick, and my mom didn't really know what to do, who did she go to? The doctor. She went to the doctor. Why? Because the doctor knows the rules and the laws and the definitions of medicine. And the doctor knows how it works and what to do and how to treat a baby who is sick. Move to me, my generation, all right? And we are in this unique position of having a foot in both worlds. They actually say that the people who were born in the years I was, which I'm not going to tell you, you can go look it up later and figure out how old I am, are like a micro-generation, because we literally grew up alongside technology. That means I had just internet in my house when I was in high school. I had social media of just like instant chatting in college, not like social media is today. And it wasn't until I was a fully formed, functional, mature adult that social media in the form it is today came on the scene. Literally, I grew up alongside technology. I had my first cell phone when I was in college, and it was a dumb phone where you had to press 3 buttons to text, to get one letter. That was my first cell phone. That was when I was in college. When I was in high school and started driving, my parents got a bag phone to put in the car. Remember the bag phone? In case of emergencies only. Right? I grew up alongside technology. And the people who are my age and my generation, we straddle both worlds. We have a foot in both worlds. And that means that when my kids were sick as babies, do you know where I went to get information about what to do? The internet. I Googled it. And what I did was read all the articles and all the things I could find that talked about how to treat a baby who had a fever that you couldn't get rid of, and decided which one I believed the most, which one had the most credibility, which one had the most authority, and then followed their advice, which often was, see a doctor. It was. The ones that had the most credibility would say, try this, try this, try this. If it doesn't work, go see the doctor. Okay. Today's young moms are in a different context. So rules, laws, definitions are the primary authority over here. Over here, life experience is the primary authority. Do you know where a young mom goes today if she has a baby with a fever she can't control? Facebook. That's where she goes. She goes and types into Facebook, someone tell me what I should do, the baby has a fever and won't stop crying. All right? Now what happens here is every one of her friends comes on and gives her advice. And you know what advice she listens to? Not the one that says take the baby to the doctor, stereotypically, right? The one that says, it worked for me. That's whose advice she listens to. When my baby was sick last week, this is what I did, and the baby's not sick anymore, and she goes, I'm going to try that. Because life experience is the primary authority. So I'm on Facebook one day, scrolling through, and I see a young mom who asks this question about an ear infection. And one woman came on and said, did you know garlic has antibacterial properties? If you put a clove of garlic in the baby's ear and tape it in there and let the baby sleep with the garlic in their ear overnight, it will cure the ear infection. It worked for me. And I was like, what has happened? No, yes, garlic has antibacterial properties, but not like that. It doesn't work that way. That's not how this works. But this is the world that we live in today. We are shifting, and it's not just the young moms, right? We can't escape the culture around us. So all of us are living in this place where culture is shifting to a place where life experience is the primary authority. I'll give you another concrete example of that when it comes to morality. When my grandparents got married and wanted to know, how do we live in a good, holy, healthy marriage? Well, my grandparents were Catholic. They went to their parish priest, they went to the church, and they said, define for us what a good marriage looks like. Give us the values and the definitions, and we're going to try to live that out in our marriage. And today, people say, let me tell you what my experience of love and relationships is, and I will tell you what my definition of marriage is, based on my experience, my life experience, and the life experience of those around me. So literally our definitions are changing. They're changing from a time where we trusted the authority who had the definition, and that's what we lived out, to a place where our life experience now informs our definitions. Now here's the hard part, and something I get to say because I live with a foot in both worlds. Neither one is wrong as a context. Okay? Both the examples I give are bad examples. But they're not wrong as a context. They're both wrong as a context. It's not that definitions are more important than life experience, or that life experience is more important than definitions. We have to be able to marry the two together. And instead, we just let the pendulum swing one way and then the other way. And that's where we're going now. But here's where this is a problem for us when we're trying to share faith. Because we were taught to share faith out of a place of definition and rules and doctrine and dogma. That's what we were taught. That's how we were formed, because that was the former context. When they used to go onto campuses college campuses and try to evangelize, they would literally start with the 4 spiritual laws. They would start with things like there's such thing as an objective truth. Right? They would start with these philosophical contexts and these spiritual laws, and then help these college students learn how to apply them. That's not the case anymore. You go onto a college campus now and they don't care about spiritual laws. They don't care about doctrine. They don't care about your teachings of your church. It doesn't apply to them. They want to know about experience. They want to share their life experience, and they want to hear about how what you have to say affects their life experience. And so as long as we start with definitions and rules and laws, we immediately don't have credibility anymore. This is how it looks in my life. I was sharing with someone recently who came to me and said, I have a real problem with the church teaching. One of these days, I'd really like their problem to be with, like, the Trinity. But it's always about sexual morality. When they say I have a problem with the church teaching, that's what it's always about, right? It's not like, you don't get to go back to, like, Athanasius or like, old heresies. Like, no, we're going to start with sexual morality. I'm like, great. So a woman comes and she says, I got a problem with the church teaching. And we start talking through what her problem is. And I'm looking for a way in with her. And finally I get to, well, can you just tell me a little bit about, like, who Jesus is to you? And she looked right at me and went, well, I don't know. I don't know who he is. I don't really know him. Now look, my husband, I told you, is a wonderful guy. His name is Tony. He believes that you should make the bed. Not just me, that I should make the bed, but he absolutely believes that if every one of you in this room made your bed every day, the world would be a better place. I am not a bed maker. In fact, I believe that making the bed actually hinders my ultimate goal of the day, which is to get back into that bed as soon as is humanly possible. And the sheets are in the way of my goal. But you know what, my husband, it matters to him. So sometimes, and he would say not very often, I make the bed. Not because I care about the bed being made, because I love him, and it matters to him. Now, if I said to all of you, if this whole talk was about making your bed, and I said, every one of you should go home and you should make your bed tomorrow morning because Tony Bird says so, you would look at me and say, that's ridiculous. I'm not making my bed. I don't know this Tony Bird. Who's he? I could care less what he thinks. But this is how we approach trying to talk to people about morality, isn't it? Well, but God created these rules and these laws for your ultimate happiness. This is what's really going to make you feel most fulfilled in life. But as Anne said earlier, the largest growing religious affiliation right now is none, N-O-N-E. That's what they check in the surveys. I don't have a religious affiliation. So they say, who is this God? Who is this Jesus? I don't know him. I don't care what he has to say about my life. We have to start with life experience first. This is where we get into the good news part, all right? This is great news for us. Because in the former context, in order to evangelize, you had to know the definitions and the rules and the doctrines and the dogmas. You had to be able to defend, right? And philosophically and with understanding and intellectually and all these things, the faith. Because that's where people were coming from. But in today's context, all you need is your life experience. That's what you need to be able to evangelize. That's it. That's the highest authority that exists in our culture now. Your life experience has power today in a way it didn't 15, 20 years ago even. When I started in youth ministry, I would tell teenagers the story of my first moment that I can remember of encounter with Jesus. It happened on a World Youth Day pilgrimage when I was 17 years old to Paris, France. We went to World Youth Day, we had Mass on a giant race track with 1 million people with Pope John Paul II. And it had rained the night before, which which I think it does every time you take teenagers to an outdoor mass. It rains the night before, so it's like mud everywhere. And we're sitting on this, and I was a Catholic kid, I was raised Catholic, I went to Catholic school, I graduated from Xavier, I did all the stuff, right? I knew that Jesus was present in the Eucharist. I knew what was going on in Mass. I probably could have told you about transubstantiation. But on that racetrack in France is where I went from something I knew to something I knew. Something I experienced. We got to communion time, and as you can imagine, it wasn't the most reverent of communion experiences. 1 million people on a muddy racetrack. After the consecration, they had sent out the Eucharistic ministers to distribute communion, and each Eucharistic minister was given a server with a blue umbrella. And the instructions for all of us attending the Mass were, find the closest blue umbrella. And so we are traipsing through the mud, stepping over people and backpacks and all this stuff to get to the blue umbrella and receive communion. And go back then through the mud to our little square of grass or dirt or whatever it was and sit. And so we did that, and I came back and I sat down. And in that moment, I was filled with warmth. It started at the center of my chest and spread all the way to the tips of my fingers and the tips of my toes and all the way to the top of my head, to the point where because I was 17, right? I looked around like, does anyone see what's happening? Should I be embarrassed? Like, what's going on? Did the sun come out? Like, what's happening here? And then it hit me that it was just Jesus loving me. That was it. And in that moment, the Eucharist went from something to someone for me. It shifted my whole experience. And while I could have told you all about it before, after that point, I knew that it was Him. That's it. I knew that it was Him. And I thought that it was because it was the Pope who had consecrated the Eucharist. Even though I knew better, I was like, maybe it was like extra Jesus-y Jesus, because it was the Pope. Like, I don't know how that works. But of course, that's not how it works, right? But at that time, I thought it was extra holy because the Pope had consecrated it. But as I continued in my journey, then I kept having experiences of encounter that involved the Eucharist. Not every time I went to Mass, but just often enough to continue to confirm for me that experience. When I was a youth minister, I would tell teenagers that story when we talked about the Eucharist. And 15 years ago, they would look at me and say, okay. If they liked me and had a relationship with me, they wouldn't call BS to my face. They would kind of go, that's probably nice for you. And then later they would say, well, maybe something happened. Maybe she had too much of the wine. I'm like, no, there wasn't any. It was just the bread. It was just the body. Like, I don't know if that really is what happened. They would explain away the experience I had 15 years ago. But today, that's no longer the case. Because when I tell teenagers that story today, they believe, at the very least, that it happened the way I say it happened. They believe that. They have to. They have to, because their highest authority is life experience. And if they question that what I say happened to me didn't really happen to me, or maybe it was something else or whatever, then it calls into question everything about their life experience as well. And so now I can tell that story and have them say, hey, maybe this could happen to me. Maybe that's something that the Lord wants for me too, especially if I invite them into that place. It's a totally different context now. My grandfather was a POW in World War II, and he had dementia towards the end of his life before he passed away. And right before he got dementia, by the grace of God, I think divine intervention, my mom and her sisters had a reporter come and interview my grandfather about his experiences in the war, and captured it all on a CD that we each got a copy of. A lot of them were stories that he would never tell us in person, because they weren't good stories of things that he'd been through and happened to him. And I have had a great relationship with my grandfather and still do. He's an incredible intercessor for our family. And I loved that CD. I thought it was great. But I will tell you that when my kids listened about a year ago to that CD, it had a different impact on them than it had on me. As much as I love my grandpa, as much as his experiences were incredible and beautiful and powerful, it was life-changing for my kids to hear about what he went through. Someone they'd never met. Someone they never knew. Because his life experience speaks to them in a different way in today's context and where we are. And the best part of that story is that at the very end of the CD, the interviewer asks my grandpa, so how did you get through? How did you survive? How did you make it through all these awful things? And my grandpa, in his very unassuming way, kind of chuckles and went, well, I prayed. He said they used to call me Father Jerry. Because every night, no matter where we were, if we were on the road, had a cot, had a bed, whatever it was, I would kneel down next to where we were sleeping and I would say my prayers. And he said, that's what got me through. See, my grandfather was one of 15 kids, and at that time there were only 15 decades of the rosary. There were only 3 sets of mysteries. Now we have another, right? But then there were only 3 sets of mysteries, which meant 15 total decades of a complete rosary. My great-grandmother had assigned every child 1 decade of the rosary to pray every day, and said, if you pray your rosary, your decade, our family prays a whole rosary every day. And my grandpa said that he got through the war because he wasn't going to let his get missed. Because he had committed to his family to pray his decade of the rosary. And my great-grandmother, when she found out that my grandpa had been captured and was missing, refused to let anyone else take Jerry's rosary, take his decade for him. And she said, because if he's alive, he's doing it, and we can't take that from him. And that story got my daughter on her own to start praying the rosary. Because she saw that it could have power because of a life experience of someone she had never met, someone she doesn't know, someone that only has authority in her life because he's related to me and related to her. This is the power that we have to speak into today's culture. Even though it's challenging, even though it's hard, even though we struggle, we can use our life experiences, the life experiences of other people we know, the stories of the lives of the saints, to speak to a culture that says, I don't care about your church. I don't care about that institution. And it's, if we can have the humility to, I'm going to be honest here, set the institution aside for just a minute and say, you know what? That's okay for you right now. Let me introduce you to Jesus. Let me tell you about what he's done for me and how he's completely changed my life in the most beautiful ways. That has power and authority. And if we can invite people into that, then I really truly believe that he will take care of the rest of it. He will. And they ask this, come to you and they ask more questions. How do you do this? And what does this mean to live this way? And there will come a time at which the institution now isn't an institution, but is the body of Christ on earth. The mystical, supernatural communion of all of us and him together. And why wouldn't you want to be a part of that if you have a relationship with him? So what does this have to do with Easter? Well, I will tell you that the first witnesses to the resurrection were a group of women who showed up at the tomb and it was empty. And what did they do? They ran back to the apostles and they said to them, listen, you all didn't listen to him because he said he was going to rise. I don't know what you were thinking, but clearly, no, of course that's not what they did. They didn't argue, they didn't debate, they didn't pull out all their apologetics and their study of the Jewish tradition and their study of the prophets. What did they do? They shared what happened to them. They just shared their experience. And that experience was powerful enough to send those disciples running to the tomb, to have that experience for themselves. And everything that comes after that, from Easter through Jesus' ascension, all the way to Pentecost, all the way through the book of Acts, is about person after person after person saying, let me tell you what happened to me. Let me tell you about this Jesus and what difference he's made in my life and what difference I think he can make in your life. And that witness was so powerful that it actually had tangible, miraculous effect on the world and on people. The first proclamation of the gospel after Pentecost is when Peter steps out onto the balcony and starts to preach. And Peter preaches for about 20 verses in the book of Acts. Look it up and read his preaching and what he says. And he talks about Jesus, not as an idea or a concept. He doesn't talk about morality. He doesn't talk about how you're supposed to live your life. He says, let me tell you about this Jesus and what we have seen and heard him say and do. And now we have witnessed this resurrection of his and his ascension. And it says in the scriptures that those people listening were cut to the heart and turned to the disciples and asked, what should we do? And the disciples say, repent and be baptized. And 3,000 people were added to the number that day. That's the power of witness. Witness that begins and ends in Jesus. Witness that begins and ends in a relationship with him first. Madeline L'Engle has this quote that I love. Jesus was not a theologian. He was a God who told stories. He's asked over 380 questions in the Gospels. Do you know how many he answers directly? 4. Only 4 times does he give a direct answer to a question. Every other time he's asked a question, he either answers with a question or with a story. Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus says, once upon a time there was a man. He answers with stories, because stories cut through to people's hearts and lives. There's a great parable that I want to read to you and share with you about this, because I know some people get all anxious about, but when do we share the truth with them? Was Jesus not sharing truth when he shared the parables? Of course he was. He was sharing truth in a way that they could hear, no matter what level they were at. Something about that story spoke to them. Right? Parables can be read on so many different levels because they speak to people where they are on their journey. So here's this story. Once upon a time, Truth went about the streets as naked as the day he was born. As a result, no one would let him into their homes. Whenever people caught sight of him, they turned away and fled. One day, when Truth was sadly wandering about, he came upon Story. Now Story was dressed in splendid clothes of beautiful colors. And Story, seeing Truth, said, "Tell me, neighbor, what makes you so sad?" Truth replied bitterly, "Ah, brother, things are bad, very bad. I'm old, very old. No one wants to acknowledge me. No one wants anything to do with me." Hearing that, Story said, "People don't run away from you because you are old. I too am old, very old. But the older I get, the better people like me. I'll tell you a secret. Everyone likes things disguised and prettied up a bit. Let me lend you some splendid clothes like mine, and you'll see that the very people who pushed you aside will invite you into their homes and enjoy your company." Truth took Story's advice and put on the borrowed clothes. And from then on, Truth and Story have gone hand in hand together, and everyone loves them. They make a happy pair. Story speaks to today. Story speaks into today's culture, in today's time, in a way that doctrine and dogma and definitions and rules just don't. Because you can argue and debate about teaching, but you don't argue and debate about a story. You can argue and debate about a piece of morality or about what the church is or what it should be. But you don't argue and debate when someone shares a witness. You receive it. And it's not just, so for me, story is the antidote. Story is the antidote to today's culture, to the problems that we're having in our church. And by story, I mean both your personal life story and other stories that exist out there. And sometimes it's the lives of the saints. I'll tell you, that's something that for my family has been really great. My kids do pick a saint every year, usually on All Saints Day. We did it yesterday, so we're a little bit far behind this year. But we pick a saint on All Saints Day every year. Each one of them does. And then they have to learn a little bit about that saint, draw a picture, and write a prayer from asking for that saint's intercession. So my youngest son every year picks the most gruesome martyrs that you can think of. Like he flips through the saint books and is like, Saint Sebastian, you see all the arrows sticking out of him? Or Saint Lawrence, who said, flip me over, I'm done on this side and was burned alive. This is what he loves. He loves the stories of the saints. This year he picked Saint Peter, not because, disciple of Jesus, first pope, no, because he heard the story about how Saint Peter was crucified upside down. He thinks that's really cool. But you see, those are stories that draw him in. He was going to pick St. Perpetua and St. Felicity one year, but then didn't because they're girls, because of the story about how she got her head chopped off, but it didn't work. It kept not actually getting chopped off. If you ever don't know the story of St. Perpetua and St. Felicity, you should look it up. It's incredible. But these are the things he loves. I'm waiting until he's a little bit older till I tell him the story about the one who carried his head still talking, right? Story, though, you see how it draws them in. Those are stories of the lives of the saints. But it doesn't just have to be that. Because look, story reveals truth even when it's popular story. Pop culture stories reveal truth too. We just have to be looking at them with the eyes of people of faith. And if we encounter stories in our world, I'm telling you, we can use them to help speak truth to the world, to people around us. These are just a couple of stories that have been really impactful in my life. Now, I was also, another thing you should know about me, I was an English literature major for my undergrad in college. So I love literature. I love books. I love to read. I have a problem. If people are like, that's so great. No, just ask my husband, it's not great. I have a problem with reading. I'm the one who has 6 books on my bookshelf I haven't bought yet, or I haven't read yet, and then I go to the bookstore and I'm like, ooh, these. And he's like, doesn't matter. We moved, I won't get rid of any books. I won't do it, I can't. I have a problem. But I love story. I always have loved story because story speaks truth into our lives, and into my life in particular. The most popular video games today are story-based video games. Are ones where you actually get to become a character in the story. Those are the video games that are most popular today because story has power today. Not just in the lives of young people, but in the lives across our culture. Story matters so much. So what are the stories that matter to you? And share those with people, and then share why. So for example, I will tell people sometimes, as an English literature major who sometimes can be a snob about stories, I absolutely can. I think one of my absolute favorite authors is Stephen King. Now, don't run me out on a rail. People are like, what? Stephen King. Here's why. Because his, with the exception of one collection of short stories that he wrote and one novel, All Dark, No Stars, and Pet Sematary, all right? With the exception of those 2, everything else he has published is about innocence and redemption. Every time. Every story he writes is about how innocence of a child can bring about redemption of even the worst in humanity. That people are saved through innocence. And I think that's incredible, and I think it's incredible how he does it in the most creative ways. This is why I think those stories have power. You don't have to like Stephen King, you don't have to read Stephen King. But start sharing with people why your stories matter. Even sharing things like lyrics of a song that can sometimes be stories. and how they've changed or how you saw them differently can be powerful, because then when other people encounter those same stories, they think about them differently. We had a high school event one time where the kids were getting irritated with me playing Christian music all the time. They said, "Can we listen to some good music, please?" And I said, "All right, fine. Here's what you can do. You can bring in any song you want, and we will play it. But you have to tell me what this song has to do with your faith." And so we had like "Jesus Take the Wheel" and "Unanswered Prayers" by Garth Brooks, and some of the typical ones. But I had one kid who brought in Ozzy Osbourne's "Iron Man." And I was like, "Uh-oh." And I was like, "All right, come on now, tell me." And he goes, "No." He goes, "Seriously?" He goes, "The first 2 verses of this song, he could be singing about Jesus." Then you listen to the lyrics of the song, and it's like, yeah, it's all about a guy who walks this earth and does great things, and then is killed, and then is raised from the dead. And then he goes, and then the 3rd verse, he sort of goes on a killing rampage in his suit made of metal. But other than that, it's a lot like Jesus. And so we played the song, you know why? Because I would like to believe that every kid who came that night can't listen to Ozzy Osbourne's "Iron Man" without thinking of Jesus now. I can't. Every time I hear that song, I think about that kid sharing that story of how it touched him and made him think in a different way about his faith. So our stories have power in today's culture. We can use the stories that are out there, but more importantly, we can use our own story. But here's the kicker. Here's the key. All right, this is where we get back to that first problem I mentioned. Our stories, our personal witness, life story, has to be about Jesus. 2 different quotes from 2 different popes. The first one, "Jesus is the only gospel. We have nothing further to say or any other witness to bear." And then from Pope Francis, "The primary reason for evangelizing is the love of Jesus which we have received, the experience of salvation which urges us to ever greater love of him." Not the knowledge of salvation, not that I can cite salvation history to you, but that I have had an experience of salvation, that I have been saved in big ways and small ways by him, and that's what drives my life, my love, and my work for the Lord. That's what drives me. We have to start and end with Jesus. And so I have a little, I don't know if you want to call it exercise or activity or something like that for you. And there's they have some bookmark thingies that they're going to hand out. Oh, you can't kind of see that quote there. One way of thinking about your story, okay? One way of thinking about how would you share your story with others. Very simple, 3 parts. I was, God did, or Jesus did. I prefer Jesus did. Now I am. Now here's the key. When we're thinking about our story in this context, it's really easy to change our story to say, I was, I did, now I am. I was grieving the loss of a friendship, and I prayed, and now I am at peace. Right? Okay, you may have prayed as part of your story, but the question is, the key part of your story is, what did he do? What did he do? I don't have time to share with you my full story tonight, but I will tell you that my story, if I gave it in this version, would sound like this. I was bitter and angry and felt like I had been completely betrayed by my husband after we had been married for about 6 years. I felt like I had to sacrifice my morality to save my marriage. I didn't know where to go. I was a wreck and a mess, and I couldn't stand the sight of him. Jesus gave me his heart for my husband. And through that process and experience of him softening me and softening my heart and giving me the forgiveness he had that I couldn't find, I was able to reconcile, to bring about new life and goodness and hope, and now have a marriage that is stronger than it ever would have been or was before that experience that we had. But it was about what he did, not about what I did, because I was sitting around saying, I can't, Lord, I can't forgive, I can't be kind. I can't be loving. I don't even know what that means right now because I'm so hurt. And my very best friend at that time looked at me and said, I said to her, how do you forgive? She said, well, you need to forgive him. I'm like, I know I need to forgive him, but I don't know what that looks like. How do you forgive someone who's hurt you that badly? How do you do that? And she said, fake it. Excuse me? She said, fake it. She said, best advice ever. She said, pretend like you've already forgiven your husband. Start treating him as if you've already forgiven him, and every time you do, even if it's just a tiny little thing, she said, ask Jesus to heal your heart and to heal your heart. And I went back to her a week later and I said, when does it work? And she said, someday you're going to realize he's already done it. It's going to come out of nowhere. And sure enough, our struggle was around having more children. And I was cleaning out a closet and ran across a diaper bag. And cleaned it out, right? Put it in the thing to give away with everything else. And it wasn't until I was on my way to St. Phineas to drop off the load of stuff that I realized it was the first time I'd encountered something related to a child and didn't get angry and bitter and frustrated with my husband. It was the first time, and I realized in that moment he had done the work. See, we sometimes think that as part of our stories it has to be about us. It has to be about me getting through and white-knuckling and doing more and being good and right, all these things. And it's really just about being open to letting him do the work. This has turned into actually a really phenomenal prayer for me as well. Because sometimes my prayer is, I know where I am, and I know where I need to be, but I don't know how to get there. So the prayer is, Jesus, I am. And just like he does to Bartimaeus on the road, that was a reading, was it today or yesterday, at Daily Mass, was the reading of the blind man who says, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me, have pity on me. And Jesus stops and looks at him and says, what do you want me to do for you? What do you want me to do for you? And the blind man says, I want to see. Not, I want to learn the lesson of my blindness, Lord. Like, no, I want to see. And so sometimes the prayer is, Lord, I am in this place. I am broken, I am hurting, I am struggling, I am suffering. And here's what I want you to do for me so that I can be healed and restored and at peace and better than I am today. So if you are in a place of suffering right now, if you are in a place of hurt and woundedness, and if you and God are fighting, then I will just say to you, that's okay. He can take it. Some bigger folks than you have fought with him. But he doesn't want to fight. He looks and says, what do you want me to do for you? What do you want me to heal for you? And then, after he does, whatever healing he brings, because sometimes he heals the very thing we asked for. And sometimes he's like backdoor sneaky and heals something way over here we didn't even know we needed healing from. But whatever healing he brings you, share it with someone else. Whatever encounter, opportunity, or moment that he provides in your life, tell someone about it. I had that encounter on a racetrack in France at 17 years old, and I was 27 years old before I shared it with anyone. I didn't tell anyone what had happened to me, what had happened. I was on a retreat. We were doing a retreat on story and discovering your story and moments of encounter that you had in your life, and it sort of came flooding back to me. And I went, oh my gosh, I totally had forgotten about that. And I went home and I dug out because I'm a pack rat and a hoarder. It's not just books. It's other things too. And I found my journal from the trip, and I flipped through it and found the day where I had written what had happened to me in my journal, and had closed it up and put it away and promptly forgotten about it. Because I never shared it. Because actually retelling what has happened to us makes it real again, not just for the person we're sharing with, but for ourselves. So when you have a moment of encounter with the Lord, big or small, share it with someone. Share it with someone. Even if they scoff at you and laugh at you and say you're ridiculous, just speak it out loud. And then ask for other people's stories. Ask them to share not what they think about X, Y, and Z. Ask them to share what their experience has been. What has your experience of God been in your life? When's the last time you experienced God in your life? I was talking with a preschool teacher after having given a talk on story and the power of story, and she said, do you know? She said that they've actually changed the way they're training us as preschool teachers. She said, when a kid comes in crying, we used to ask, what's wrong? And she said, but now they're teaching us to ask the kid, tell me what happened. Tell me what happened instead of what's wrong. Why? Because what's wrong starts with judgment and value and definition and rules. And tell me what happened starts with your experience. So ask other people for their experience, for their story. And then, and this is the hardest part, for me anyway, because I'm a crappy listener. I really am. I'm so bad at it. Just shut your mouth and listen. No matter what crazy thing they say about their experience, no matter how off the wall they get, how inflammatory they get, how angry they get, just listen to their story. And at the end say, thank you so much for sharing. And leave it at that. Unless they ask more questions, right? Then you can answer them. But this is the huge challenge. Because we bring all of our definitions and rules and understandings and all of that into our listening. And so it colors how we listen. I'll give you an example. We were sitting in the living room at my in-laws' house, and my kids were sharing about Adam and Eve with my in-laws. And my in-laws are, I don't know, they're like marginally or used to be Methodist or something. Do you understand that? Like, and I don't know, something they used to be. And my kids are talking to my mother-in-law about Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And, Grandma, did you know that they didn't trust God? And okay, so all this stuff. And I walk in the living room, and my mother-in-law says, I know this story. And she looks at me, and she says, when they ate the apple, that's when they had sex, right? And I was like, what? No! Are you kidding? Where on earth would you get that? Like, no, that's their first command God gave them was be fruitful and multiply. How do you think that was going to happen? No, that wasn't when they ate the apple. What? In fact, eating the apple is what caused all the problems with that in our world today. What? And what do you think happened? She shut right down. Now, she's wrong. But it turns out, this is a lesson I have learned that's been really hard for me to learn, it's not always helpful to point out to people when they're wrong. Sometimes it's enough to just let them share. Because later, now fortunately, I did have a moment of saying, okay, Lord, I really botched that one. I'm really sorry. Please give me a second chance. And he's a God of second chances, so he did. And I have had other opportunities to sit with my mother-in-law. And I found out later that that was something she had thought she remembered learning in Sunday school as a kid. Now, I don't know. Maybe she did learn it in Sunday school. I don't know what the Methodists teach their kids in Sunday school or what they did in the 60s. I don't know. But it doesn't really matter. What matters is it's a point of connection for us. She remembered something from Sunday school and wanted to share it. And I shut her down. By not being just open to listening to what she had in her story in that moment and just saying, thank you so much for sharing. Which doesn't affirm that their story is right. It just affirms that they have a story to share. All right, last thing is this. Because I want you to ask people, this is your homework, ask people for their stories at Thanksgiving this year. But I want you to remember that we are in a world and a culture that doesn't start with definitions anymore. It starts with life experience. And so we have a very short little thing here that's going to prove to you what I mean. In 2016, Pew Research Group did a study on religious practices in America. It's the one that showed that the nuns, NONE, is the highest or fastest rising demographic in religious affiliation. As a part of that study, they asked a couple questions. And what they started with was asked people to identify their affiliation. And then had follow-up questions based on that. So the first thing they asked was, for people who were identified as Catholic, are you practicing Catholic? All right, turn to the person next to you and tell them one assumption you would make about someone who says, I'm a practicing Catholic. What would you assume? All right, how many of you say they go to Mass? Right? Me too. This is an assumption I would make. 2016 study in the United States of America. Here's what they found. People who said, I'm a practicing Catholic. 45% of them go to church once a month and on major holidays. 4% go to Mass weekly. 4%. 48% of them believe you can have a personal relationship with God. That doesn't mean they do have one, just that they believe you can. And this one's not up here, but 67% say that belief in Jesus' resurrection is essential. 33% of people who say, I'm a practicing Catholic, do not believe that you need to believe in the resurrection to be a practicing Catholic. How about this one? I used to be Catholic. Especially in today's time, my assumption would have been that they walked away from the church because of the sex abuse scandal. Or maybe because of a teaching they disagreed with. All right? Those would probably be my two number ones that I would assume. Reasons for leaving? 71% of them said they just drifted away. 65% stopped believing in a teaching, 27% was the sex abuse scandal, and 3% was separation or divorce. I used to respond to people who said, I used to be Catholic with this. Were you baptized Catholic? Because if you were, you're once Catholic, always Catholic. Guess what? That's true, but it's not helpful. It's not. They literally have just expressed to you a label they've rejected, and by saying that, what did I do? Slap it right back on them. You rejected this label, but I want you to have it back anyway. Or how about this one? All right, this is one of my favorites because it totally illustrates the point we were making before about definitions. I'm an atheist. What do we assume about people who are atheists? They don't believe in God, right? Nope. 15% of people who said I'm an atheist say they believe in God. 6% with whom you can have a personal relationship. 19% are formal members of religious congregations. 10% pray weekly outside religious services. And 21% believe miracles happen today. Because they are not using Webster's definition of atheism to define themselves. They have an experience, a life experience of some kind, that has led them to the definition of atheist. My favorite question to ask someone who says, I'm an atheist, tell me about the God you don't believe in. Tell me about the God you don't believe in. Because what often comes out is something I can respond to, I don't believe in that God either. Like my friend who said, I'm an atheist because I don't believe in a God who would take away my brother with cancer, give my brother cancer, take him away from his family, his wife who can't get a job because she's disabled and has 3 young kids to raise. I don't believe in a God that would do that. Guess what? I don't believe in that God either. We have to be willing to ask for their stories and their definitions and just let them share without our commentary, without our advice, without us saying anything. I don't know if any of you have ever had the pleasure of watching Dora the Explorer. But here's what Dora does. She looks at the screen and she says to the kids, say jump! And then she stares at them and blinks. Say jump! I'm telling you, be Dora the Explorer. Ask the question, say nothing. Stare at them. Don't be creepy like Dora, but right? She's kind of creepy. Like, don't just blink. But don't put yourself in. Don't derail their story. Don't start sharing your story right then if you ask for theirs, right? Just listen. Listen and allow yourself to be fascinated by the way God works in someone else's life, even if they can't see it. Listen and be prepared to learn a new language. Their language. Their definitions. Their rules. Their understandings. And you'll see that just doing that with people builds relationship and makes possible evangelization in ways and places that it never was, you can feel like it never was possible before. This is my last quote here that I want to share with you, is the one on the right. Pope Francis said in The Joy of the Gospel, the church will have to initiate everyone, priests, religious, and laity, if I were going to edit out deacons, into this art of accompaniment, which teaches us to remove our sandals before the sacred ground of the other. The next time someone challenges you on your faith, pushes you on why you can still be Catholic in the moment of the scandal that we're in right now, or says they think that your faith is irrelevant or a fantasy or no better than Santa Claus, all things that people have said to me in my life, can you stop and for a moment look at that person and recognize that despite all the hurt and brokenness that's pouring out of them in that moment, they are sacred ground. That God is living and working and moving in their life. And that sometimes they just need someone to ask and really listen to be able to discover that for themselves. I don't think the answer to the church is going to come from the bishops, from the Pope. I don't think any synod is going to give us the answer to the fact that the church is failing right now and it's falling apart and we're losing numbers. And I don't think that easel checkout procedures or whatever else it is that you spent your last parish meeting on, if it's minor things, small things, all that's going to do is we're doing this, it's going to maybe make the curve a little bit less. I think what will change our trajectory, what's going to bring us new life and growth in the church, is for us to tap into our baptism, to recognize that the power of the Holy Spirit resides in each one of us, and that we have a story to tell. We have a story of God's power in our life, and so does every other person that we're talking to. And just being open to sharing and listening to each other's stories, I think, will make all the difference in the world. All right, so your homework. Take your I was, God did, I am. Think about that for yourself. Share it with someone on your way out today. And then ask for someone's story at Thanksgiving with your family, wherever it is that you gather. Ask for people's stories and just listen. All right? Thank you.